The clock struck midnight, yet her thoughts refused to sleep. They churned like a storm beneath her ribs, 1,000 whispers fighting for control. The city beyond her window pulsed with restless light, but it was quiet compared to the noise inside her head. She had tried to tame it. Mantras, breathing, music, yet the voice always came back stronger, wearing every mask she feared. "You're not enough," it hissed. "You never were." But that night, something shifted. She didn't argue back. Instead, she asked softly, "What if you're not my enemy?" The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was listening. Would she dare to face the voice that had followed her all her life? Not as a curse, but as a call to awaken? Morning arrives like a reluctant apology. The light seeps into the cracks of her apartment, brushing against unwashed dishes and half-read books. Ilara moves slowly, her body heavy from sleeplessness. The voice begins again, softer now, but cunning, threading through her thoughts as she makes coffee. It reminds her of every mistake she's ever made, every promise broken. She almost believes it, until she remembers last night's whisper, "What if you're not my enemy?" The words echo faintly, and something inside her stirs. Not courage yet, but curiosity. The day drags her through its motions. Emails, meetings, polite smiles. But under it all, the noise keeps whispering. It questions her worth, mocks her calm, interrupts every silence. By afternoon, she feels hollow. A vessel for 1,000 voices that aren't her own. Yet amid the chaos, one sound lingers, a memory of her mentor's voice from long ago. Gentle but firm. When you stop running, the truth will find you. She realizes she has been running all her life. The voice grows louder that night, not cruel this time, desperate. It pleads, bargains, accuses all at once. She tries to drown it with music, with scrolling, with noise of her own making, but nothing works. Finally, she drops her phone and sinks to the floor, her breath quick and shallow. Tears come without reason. Through them, she whispers again, "I'm listening." The silence that follows feels like being held. For the first time, she isn't afraid of the quiet. Days pass. The city remains loud, but something in her begins to change. She notices moments between thoughts, fragile pauses filled with peace. Then, an old message arrives on her phone. It's from Noah, 35, the man she once loved and lost. "You should visit the monastery again." Tenzin's still there. The name pierces her like a bell through fog. Without thinking, she books a ticket. The voice inside murmurs, curious now, not angry. "So, you're finally going back." The train carved through a sea of mist as dawn broke over distant hills. Ilara watched her reflection blur against the window, the city's memory dissolving behind her. Each mile stretched like a breath she hadn't taken in years. The voice inside had grown quieter, not gone, but subdued, like a child finally tired of shouting. In its place, another sound emerged, the faint rhythm of her heartbeat syncing with the wheels below. For the first time, she didn't rush to fill the silence. She simply listened. Maybe peace wasn't found by escaping the noise, but by traveling straight through it. By midday, the city had vanished, replaced by winding dirt roads and the whisper of wind through pine. Ilara stepped out of a taxi at the edge of a small village, the air colder, thinner, cleaner. She felt out of place, too polished for the rugged simplicity surrounding her. Yet, something about the silence here unnerved her. It wasn't empty, it was listening. An old bell echoed faintly from beyond the hills. Her heart quickened. Somewhere out there he waited. Tenzin, the teacher she had once called. The man who hears what others fear to say. The path to the monastery was steep, littered with stones and the ghosts of her own doubts. Her breath came in sharp bursts, every step echoing louder in her chest. Memories flickered. Her arguments with Noah, the sleepless nights, the mirror that once frightened her. Yet here, the voice was strangely gentle. "Keep going," it whispered. "You need to see." By the time she reached the gates, her legs trembled, but her eyes were clear. She knocked once, then again. The heavy wooden doors opened with a sigh, revealing the man she'd come to find. Tenzin said nothing at first. He simply looked at her, as though reading the silence between her words. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, weathered by stillness. "You came because the noise grew too loud," he said. Alara nodded, her throat tightening. "Then stop trying to silence it," he continued. "Listen until it tells you the truth." The simplicity of his words struck her harder than any sermon. For the first time, she felt seen, not as someone broken, but as someone unfinished. That night, Alara sat outside beneath the stars, her body aching from the climb, her mind heavy with thoughts she didn't understand. Yet, the silence around her felt different now. Not empty, but vast. She heard the wind move through the trees, the creak of wood, the rhythm of her own pulse. For the first time, the voice inside didn't argue. It simply existed beside her, quiet, curious, as though watching her learn to breathe again. She didn't need to silence it anymore. She only needed to listen deeply enough to understand what it had been trying to say all along. The mornings in the monastery began before dawn. Bells rang softly, not to command, but to remind. Alara awoke each day to mist drifting across the courtyard, the scent of sandalwood in the air. At first, her mind protested. The noise surged, demanding distraction. But under Tenzi's quiet gaze, she learned not to resist it. "Let the noise speak," he told her. "Listen as if it belongs to someone you love." At first, she thought it was absurd to love the voice that had tormented her. Yet, as she sat in the stillness, something inside began to soften. The voice, once sharp, began to tremble, almost afraid of being understood. Days passed in silence. No phone, no mirrors, no noise, only the quiet company of her own thoughts. Sometimes she cried for no reason. Sometimes she laughed. And sometimes she simply watched her mind speak in endless loops. Tenzin rarely interrupted. When he did, it was only to ask one question. Who is it that listens? The first time, she didn't understand. The 10th time, she still didn't. But on the 20th, something clicked. If she could hear the voice, then perhaps she wasn't the voice at all. The realization struck her not as a thought, but as light cracking through the fog. That evening, Tenzin invited her to walk through the garden. The air was cool, the moon resting above the hills like a silent witness. He spoke slowly, every word deliberate. "The voice you hear," he said, "is only the echo of fear seeking love. If you fight it, it screams. If you hold it, it whispers." Alara felt her throat tight. She had fought herself for so long, she had forgotten how to listen without judgment. "And when it stops whispering?" she asked quietly. Tenzin smiled faintly. "Then you no longer need a voice to know peace." "Then you no longer need a voice to know peace." That night, Alara sat alone before the monastery's ancient bell. She listened not with her ears, but with her whole being. The voice inside began to rise again, doubtful, frightened, human. But she didn't resist. She let it speak. It told her of all the times she'd hidden behind perfection, of the love she lost, of the child she once was. She felt every ache and didn't turn away. As tears fell freely, she realized she was not broken, only unfinished. The bell chimed once, slow and deep, and in that sound, she felt her heart align with something vast and timeless. At dawn, Tenzin found her still sitting by the bell, her eyes red but alive. He approached quietly and placed a hand over her shoulder. "You've begun to hear," he said softly. She looked up, smiling through exhaustion. "It's quieter," she whispered. But it's still there. Tenzin nodded. Good. You can't silence truth. You can only make peace with it. As the sun rose over the mountain, light washed over them both. Elara felt warmth bloom in her chest, not the fleeting calm of escape, but the steady pulse of acceptance. The voice inside no longer frightened her. It was simply her. Finally her. A week passed, and Elara's silence deepened. Yet beneath the stillness something waited, old, heavy, and unresolved. One morning, Tenzin placed a small hand mirror in front of her during meditation. "Look," he said gently. She hesitated. Her reflection stared back, familiar yet foreign. The calm she had built began to tremble. The voice returned, not loud, but honest. "You still hate what you see." Her chest tightened. Tears rose unbidden. Tenzin spoke again quietly. "The mirror never lies. It only shows what love has not yet touched." She realized then that the true lesson was not about silence. It was about compassion. That evening, she couldn't sleep. The mirror's image haunted her. The curve of her mouth, the shadows under her eyes. She realized how long she had been at war with her own face, her own story. She stepped outside, the moon high above, the air sharp and clear. "For the first time," she whispered aloud, "I forgive you." The words felt strange, almost fragile, but the night seemed to listen. Somewhere deep within, the voice stirred, softer than ever, almost childlike, whispering back, "Thank you." The next morning, Tenzin guided her to the monastery's river, where the water ran clear and slow. "Every voice in you," he said, "is like a current. Some calm, some wild, none of them wrong." Elara knelt by the bank, her reflection rippling over the surface. For the first time, she didn't correct it, didn't flinch. She simply let it move, distort, reform. "You can't heal what you reject," Tenzin said quietly. "Hold it, even if it shakes." Elara cupped the cold water in her hands, staring at her reflection inside it, trembling but whole. That afternoon, while tending the monastery garden, Elara found herself humming softly, an old tune she hadn't remembered in years. The melody carried no purpose, no thought. It simply was. For the first time in her adult life, she felt herself existing without trying to fix anything. The noise inside had transformed, not vanished, but woven gently into her awareness. She could hear it, accept it, and even smile at it. When Tenzin passed by, he said only, "Now you are beginning to speak without words." That night, Tenzin met her at the meditation hall once more. The candles burned low, the air thick with quiet. "There is one more lesson," he said. "The voice will return, louder than ever. But this time, it will test your love, not your strength." Elara nodded, fear flickering in her chest. "When it does," he continued, "remember this. You are not the storm. You are the sky that holds it." She closed her eyes, breathing in his words. The voice inside stirred faintly, but now she smiled. For the first time, she was ready to meet it without running. The night began gently, raining against the roof, wind whispering through the pines. Elara sat in her room, reading, when the power flickered. Darkness swallowed the light, and with it, her calm began to quiver. The silence turned heavy, the air electric. Then, from somewhere deep within, the voice returned, sharper than before, cruel, pleading, relentless. "You think you've changed? You're just pretending. You'll fall again." Her chest tightened, breath caught. The lessons, the stillness, all began to slip. She gripped the edge of her bed, trembling. This was the storm Tenzin had warned her about. The final test of love against fear. The storm outside mirrored the one within. Wind roared, shaking the windows. The voice screamed now, pulling old wounds from the depths. Every mistake, every betrayal, Every moment she had felt unworthy. Elara pressed her hands over her ears, whispering, "Stop." But Tenzin's words echoed faintly through the noise. "Don't silence it. Love it." Her tears fell faster than the rain. She opened her palms, lowered her defenses, and whispered into the chaos, "I love you." For a moment, everything inside her froze, and then something broke open, vast and quiet as the night beyond the storm. Hours passed. The storm began to fade, replaced by the soft hum of distant thunder. Elara sat motionless, exhausted but strangely light. The voice, once a tyrant, now spoke with gentleness. "I was only trying to protect you," it said. She closed her eyes, understanding washing over her like warm rain. The voice wasn't her enemy. It was the frightened child she had abandoned within herself. "I know," she whispered. "I see you now." And with that, silence bloomed, not empty, but alive. For the first time, she wasn't at war. She was whole. At sunrise, she stepped outside into the damp courtyard. Mist curled over the stones, the world freshly washed. Tenzin stood by the bell, watching her approach with the quiet knowing of someone who had seen many storms pass. "You faced it," he said softly. Elara nodded. "I didn't silence it. I listened." He smiled, eyes warm. "And now," she breathed deeply, the air crisp and alive. "Now," she said. "It's quiet, not because it's gone, but because it's understood." Tenzin bowed his head as if honoring something sacred in her words. That night, the stars returned. Countless, shimmering, infinite. Elara sat by the monastery gate, looking up at the sky that once felt unreachable. The voice within was no longer separate. It breathed with her, spoke gently when she faltered, quiet when she didn't need it. For the first time, she realized peace wasn't silence. It was harmony. The world, the noise, the mind, the heart, all moving together like music she had finally learned to hear. "Thank you," she whispered to the sky and to herself. Somewhere in the dark, the wind carried her words like a prayer finally answered. The morning she left, the monastery felt different. Not because it had changed, but because she had. The air was still cool, perfumed with pine and wet earth. Tenzin waited by the gate, silent as always. "You are ready," he said simply. Elara bowed, tears welling but gentle this time, like soft rain. "What if the world makes me forget?" she asked. He smiled, lines deepening around his calm eyes. "Then, listen again." She nodded, understanding that the teaching wasn't a secret she could carry. It was a way of being. She turned toward the road, the mountains opening before her like an invitation. The bus ride back to the city felt different from the journey that brought her there. The same winding roads, the same villages and rivers, but this time, she wasn't running. She watched the world blur by, every moment feeling both new and ancient. The voice inside spoke softly now, like a friend pointing out beauty she might have missed. "Look," it whispered, "how alive everything is." She smiled faintly, realizing she no longer feared its presence. It was no longer the judge. It had become the witness. When she returned to the city, the noise hit her like a wave. Traffic, voices, sirens, screams. But this time, it didn't shake her. She moved through it with steady breath, her awareness untangled from the chaos. People brushed past her, rushing, distracted, while she walked as if time itself had slowed. The voice inside murmured softly, not in panic, but in prayer. This, too, is life. She realized that the world hadn't changed. Only the way she heard it had. The same noise that once consumed her now sounded almost like music. That evening, she visited a small cafe she and Noah once loved. the same wooden tables, the same old piano in the corner. When he entered, their eyes met without the ache of yesterday. "You seem different," he said quietly. She smiled, stirring her tea. "Maybe I finally learned to listen." They spoke softly, not to repair the past, but to honor it. When they parted, there was no bitterness, only stillness, gentle and full. As she stepped outside, she realized that forgiveness wasn't an act. It was a presence that arrived when nothing more needed to be said. Later that night, Ilara returned home. The same apartment that once echoed with her thoughts now felt alive with silence. She opened her window. The city hummed below. She closed her eyes and listened, not to escape, not to analyze, simply to be. The voice inside whispered faintly, "We made it." She smiled, realizing peace was never something to find, only something to remember. The candle flickered. The wind sighed, and somewhere deep within, the girl who once feared her own mind finally fell asleep in harmony with it. Weeks passed. Life returned to its rhythm: work, mornings, laughter, and silence. But Ilara felt everything differently now. The city's noise no longer invaded her. It flowed through her like wind through open windows. One morning, while sitting in a park, she watched a small boy chasing pigeons, his laughter echoing through the cold air. For a brief moment, she saw herself in him, wild, unafraid, untouched by the voice of judgment. She realized that peace wasn't the absence of thought, but the return to innocence, the ability to live without fear of one's own heart. At work, her colleagues noticed the change. She no longer rushed to fill silence in conversations. Her presence felt grounded, unhurried. When someone asked her secret, she simply said, "I stopped fighting myself." The words hung in the air, simple yet vast. She no longer tried to fix everything or everyone. Instead, she listened to people, to spaces, to pauses between words. In those pauses, she found something greater than peace: connection. That evening, she recorded a voice message, not for anyone else, but for herself. "If you ever forget," she said softly, "remember this: peace isn't quiet. It's honest." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with tenderness. She saved the recording and set her phone down beside her journal, smiling faintly. She realized that even if the voice returned, it no longer needed to be tamed. It had become her teacher, the whisper that guided her home to herself. Later that night, as she prepared for bed, the voice returned one last time. Faint, familiar, but different. "Are you still there?" it asked. Ilara smiled into the darkness. "Always," she whispered back. There was no more fear, no division. The voice was no longer an intruder. It was the echo of her own soul, finally embraced. As she drifted towards sleep, she understood the secret teaching in its truest form. When you stop running from your thoughts, they lead you home. In the quiet hours before dawn, the city slept, and Ilara dreamed. She stood in a field of light, vast, endless, unbroken. The wind whispered her name, but it wasn't the voice of her mind. It was the hum of the universe moving through her. When she opened her eyes, the first light of morning spilled into her room. She breathed in deeply, her heart steady. There was no noise now, no storm, no separation. Only the whisper, soft, eternal, alive, reminding her that peace was never the end of the journey. It had been walking beside her all along.